Does Zenless Zone Zero have a HP inflation and current endgame issues that can potentially ruin the future and turn more players away more and more, instead of inviting them in to get better at the game and to play and spend more money? Yes, but also kind of, but also definitely yes, but also we kind of have to wait and see. Sadly, we need more time as the game progresses towards the end of the year. Proxies, welcome back to the channel. My name is Zeno, and let's talk about HP inflation, shield endgame buffs that give a false sense of player knowledge and skill, a potential lack of variety in team comps and options to choose from, and a very worrying trend that Heya games tend to do with their gacha games that focus more on the endgame content specifically, like Zenless. And why, if we don't start the conversation up again right now and keep it going and let them know via surveys and social media channels, we might face bigger issues in the future. Before all that though, remember to like, comment, and subscribe to help smaller creators like myself join the Discord to chat to the community there, or just become a member of the channel to support me in the work I do here directly. But with that all being said, let's just jump into it, shall we? So I haven't discussed this topic on the channel before, so I'll take the time to do it now and strike while the iron's kind of hot and the community is having this discussion again, and hopefully just keep it pushing in more of a positive light. One thing I'll say up front, this is obviously just my personal perspective on the conversation. Everyone's going to have different ones. Everyone's accounts are in different places. I am myself with the way that I have built my own personal account from day one, chasing my favorites, but also having higher than average luck, and also acknowledging that you need to build around your favorites to make them work long term if they fall off. It means I haven't really fell to the endgame problems too much myself, but I wholeheartedly agree there is some, and it's worth talking about. And now it's only going to get worse and worse. So let's get the facts about ZZZ and its current endgame modes, Deadly Assault and Sheer Defense, out of the way really quick. So Deadly Assault has been raising the HP of the bosses by up to roughly 10 to 20% in some of the recent rotations for the exact same boss, meaning if you go in with the exact same team and try and tackle it, you're actually getting lower scores, and some of the players will be getting closer and closer to not being able to 3-star a stage eventually. Using the same teams and getting the worse results, it just feels genuinely awful. It makes players not want to keep trying when their investments fall off so quickly. Endgame can be challenging, but it also still needs to be fun and rewarding. Deadly Assault also has incredibly strong and agent/team specific buffs that are making players get far higher scores than they honestly should be, which also leads players into a false sense of account progression. A lot of players stepping into the endgame right now simply do not understand the heavy lifting that these buffs can do for your scores. These buffs are simply too strong, and the bosses are simply too balanced around them. Deadly Assault is also introducing some really damn cool bosses and mechanics, but it's also introducing way too many invulnerability and invincible phrases into the fights that just waste time, meaning your scores might not be as high versus other styles of bosses that allow you to just wail on them damage-wise. There is currently no real cool ways to skip over these phases with maybe a high risk and reward playstyle or gimmick, allowing for more player expression. Deadly Assault is also a masterstroke in genius of making the players feel awful for not pulling the new units and relying on their older favorites, which continuously perform worse patch after patch. But at the same time, they don't reward players for fully getting the new units, as you still only do roughly the same scores as what you used to do with your older units. Now, a lot of this is also represented in Shiyu defense as well. However, Shiyu is drastically easier because it's a straight DPS race with only 2 teams needed to clear. And it doesn't really matter how you clear it as long as you do in the time limit. A DA, on the other hand, requires a far higher level of skill, practice, team synergy, boss mechanics for performance point boosts, and a larger roster of agents to play with, needing up to 3 teams in total if players need them, and in total requires the players to put in just a ton more time and effort into mastering this game mode, all the while getting very few polys as a reward for actually doing so. My take on endgame in gacha games in general is pretty much this. They are for the very limited subsection of the player base who wants to put their favorites and meta picks through the ringer and test what they can really do. Endgame is for players and accounts that have been playing for multiple months at the very least at a normal account progression pace and want to take the game more seriously and min-max the currency rewards that the game gives you every patch. Endgame is called endgame for a reason. It's not for everyone. It never will be. It never has been. And any other game, including genres like MMOs and games like Final Fantasy XIV or WoW, high-end looter shooters like Destiny's Raids, for example. Considering we can look at the data from the Heya lab itself and see that on average, only up to or less than 10% of the entire player base attempts the endgame modes, and I mean attempts, we can clearly see that we are in the vast minority of players when it comes to this conversation. It doesn't invalidate it, and it's still worth having, but you just got to understand there's not that many of us that actually quote-unquote care. So DA in particular is catching some heat at the moment for its current rotation, mostly stirred from the unusually thick Defiler boss. I absolutely would, by the way. To understand why, I think players need to look back a bit and actually to when DA launched and to what happened around that rough time frame. HP inflation has always been a thing for a long while. However, Anomaly teams and agents have run an absolute muck as meta for so long and taken up the majority of the entire year that I think people are a little blinded to what was already happening long ago, and it's only starting to now become more clear. Let's talk about Miyabi. I love Miyabi a lot, actually. I think she's a cool person. She has a cool personality and cool character, fun gameplay. I think she's super flashy. She's like 110% my type. Ice element, katana wielding agent, super pretty, judgment cut Virgil stuff. Like, I absolutely love it. However, I can be objective. Miyabi transformed the game a lot when she released. Anybody that picked up Miyabi back in 1.4 originally noticed very quickly how absurdly strong she is, and the ceiling of DPS rose on every single person's account that got that agent. I think people are just a little bit biased and they don't understand that for those that did not have Miyabi at the time, the Bringer DA boss, the one from the 1.4 story, was a nightmare. So many people could absolutely not clear that boss with decent scores, and some people couldn't do it at all. At the time, Anomaly was slowly starting to ramp up as well, more and more in general around Miyabi. There we had Bernice, we had Yanagi, Astra Yao released the patch after in 1.5, with her buffs making once again the floor of any account that had her skyrocket in strength. Now, to those of us like myself, that means Soldier 11 and Alan Joe, yes, really, typical attacker crit-based agents that require stun phases to unleash their biggest DPS and damage in a fight. This was like a joke in comparison. We did get lighter, so for someone like me, which helps a lot, but even then, it's not really even close. We could not compete with that level of increased power. And as more and more Anomaly units released, or units that could help support them, especially like Vivian as well later on, which just broke those teams even further. So anyway, I bring all this up because the majority of DA's release and runtime, we've had very strong Anomaly units, starting with basically the strongest unit in the game still to date, which is Miyabi. And they were released patch after patch, and though that the shield buffs and bosses that were present in the endgame modes were heavily catered towards them just non-stop all year. People playing the game prior, or new players joining in, or just returning players wanting to give ZZZ another chance, were kind of faced with a bit of an issue in terms of account progression. If you were not on board with picking up Anomaly units specifically, whether that was like a waifu over meta or not, you were inherently going to struggle with endgame content, or just be blocked off from enjoying it without resorting to unconventional methods to clear, like using and building units that you did not want to. HP inflation has always been here, but the methods the devs gave us to combat it, in terms of summoning new agents to fill gaps in our rosters, to tackle new scenarios, try new things, was so anomaly focused for so long. There is now many players, and a good chunk of the vocal minority, which is us here watching and making these videos and commenting to add to the conversation, that don't have many options elsewhere outside of Anomaly now that the game has started to tip back towards those other archetypes. Attacker agents and teams have been a low focus for a long time. That and attacker versus Anomaly agents just, in my opinion, isn't even close in terms of strength, ease of use, options to use, choose and pick from. Attacker teams generally require more skill and a player intention to actually practice and learn boss mechanics, whereas Anomaly teams, it's kind of just unga bunga go at all times. You can unleash the majority of your team's overall damage without taking advantage of stun phases, without major skill involved, ignoring mechanics, and you can kind of just smash your head against the wall more often than not and get better scores. Rupture is another archetype that is semi-newer, and it's actually about to get major boosts in Yidhari, who is an ice DPS Rupture, Manato, who's going to be more of like the free-to-play friendly option in Fire Rupture, and we're getting a dedicated Rupture support in Lucia. So those teams will start to appear more and more in-game as more release, and more bosses will start to cater towards more Rupture style mechanics or miasma or just other things that they focus best on. So what does all of this rambling mean at the end of the day? Well, all in all, there is always some things we as players can do to help mitigate some of the HP inflation increases and rise of the devs catering towards on-banner units more and more as the game goes on. The biggest thing is, some people might take this the wrong way, but is taking account and personal responsibility to a small degree. You simply cannot expect to be able to always max clear everything with average or below average builds, refusing to summon the best supports or units to assist your favorites pushing through and lasting longer, and to not build around those favorites in any way and expect them to perform like they used to. One big thing is drive sets and farming substats. While the majority of the players and team's damage can be unlocked from just very average builds, this game does cater towards making sure you are well equipped to tackle bosses with decently built agents in endgame content. Look to websites, look to subreddits for the agent mains, join communities and discords that specialize in helping. Post screenshots and ask for second opinions. You might think that you have a really great build or you have the skill needed to clear something, but there's other content creators that do account reviews every week, like ALG and Kede the 7th, just for example, that prove completely otherwise when it comes to the more casual players. There is always new drive sets releasing. Check if anything new has better options and performance increases for your favorite characters. The new support set, for example, that just dropped this patch is insanely strong. It's basically best in slot for every support now. I guarantee, because it basically has permanent uptime on the buffs, a lot of people's agents and teams now do a lot more damage once it's slapped into them, because it basically has like no special mechanics to trigger it like some of the other support sets. New agents and vertical investment. As I mentioned before, Alan Joe is my all-time favorite unit since day one of this game. I, personally, struggle a lot with her as HP inflation has increased. I often cannot get her over the finish line without wheelchairing her through with like broken supports or sub DPSs on the team. For players like me, for this unit in particular, right? For an example's sake, what can I do? I have to skip new agents that you aren't interested in, and I have to save for your favorites. Make sure they get their Wenjins on an array rerun for an upgrade. Make sure to look into Mindscapes, or even two, if they have decent value. I can invest in her teammates more. When Lighter gets his rerun, I desperately want his M1 or maybe even an M2 because it's a very large increase for fire and ice teams. When we eventually get a better ice niche support, opposed to just slapping an Astrial, you bet, no matter who it is, I'm probably going to get them to make sure that my Alan Joe shines as long as she can. If you want to use waifus over meta, you have to invest in them vertically and specifically, as that is how the game was created by the devs, to shill brand new agents forever, and this will sadly just never change no matter how much we wish it did. Practice is another thing. You would be surprised how much my own personal scores have increased by actually reading the boss mechanics or looking at guides breaking them down. By running the stages back time and time again over a week or so period when the thing is live, aiming to get better at the actual game. I know this point isn't for everyone, but if you want to enjoy and play the endgame for ZZZ specifically, this is a big part of the experience. If you want to chase higher scores or eventually just get the scores required to get the max rewards, you need to put the time in. Next point is FOMO. None of this matters. It's a gacha game, for God's sakes. Like, none of this matters. These are actually meant to be played casually. There is absolutely no harm in missing rotations of endgame modes where your account simply isn't in the spot to tackle it, or you summon the quote-unquote right units to beat it. Each endgame mode gives a decently small chunk of rewards every patch, but it's kind of just that. It's a small chunk. Shiyu defense gives more than double that rewards of Deadly Assault, and it costs up to 33% less in terms of like agents required and account progressions to actually reach that bar. Missing a couple of single pulls is like the smallest issue in the world, so don't let the FOMO eat away at you if that's one of the reasons. It's really just not that big of a deal at all. I'm not going to invalidate people's opinions though and feelings when clearing becomes arbitrarily harder every patch for no reason, and investments in teams or agents feels like it's actually going down the drain, because like, just remember, the devs are never gonna stop releasing new units every 3+ weeks to try and get the money out of the player base. This is how Hoyo's business works and how Hoyo's business always will work. Very sadly. Lastly is feedback. Submit the in-game surveys. Rally around people in the communities respectfully, of course, and in positive ways, that align with your feelings. Let them know on social medias and continue the conversation. That devs do not listen to which they do not know of. Vote with your wallet. Stop spending money. Don't buy the latest outfit, the battle pass, the $5 monthly thing. If you feel like you aren't being valued, spend your time and money elsewhere. I do it all the time. I'm doing it right now, actually, with HSR and Genshin, for example, in the same Hoyo gacha space. HP inflation has gotten worse, and it is getting worse at a very alarming rate for those of us that do enjoy the endgame content. It's good to have these conversations at the moment, but I think people often forget or simply are just a little too biased. This has always been an issue, starting back to with Miyabi and Astro Yao's releases, where the average account power level skyrocketed with these two units alone if you acquired them, and for those that didn't acquire them, they have severely struggled for the majority of the entire year. TLDR, HP inflation bad, Hoyo business practices bad, gacha, more like gotcha, Alan's best girl, Silver Soldier Ambi will rise again, skill issue, spend more money, I'm not a furry but this game makes me confused inside, I'd let the defiler defile me, and $20 is $20, my friend. Anyway, if you guys enjoyed today's video, remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll catch you all in the next one. So thank you so much for watching and or listening to me ramble, and as always, my name is Zeno, and you guys take care now.